The weight of solitude, the purple sky stretched endlessly above the rolling hills where Nira tended her family's farm. 3 moons hung like ancient coins in the twilight, casting silver shadows across the grasslands. She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her pale blue skin. The rope burns on her palms stung as she adjusted her grip on the lead line. Before her stood one of the massive Korath beasts, with 6 powerful legs planted firmly in the soft earth. The creature's thick, armored hide gleamed in the moonlight, and its 4 amber eyes regarded her with stubborn intelligence. Each Korath stood nearly twice her height and weighed more than a small transport vessel. They were valuable for their rich milk and strong hides, but managing them alone had become nearly impossible. "Please, gentle one," she whispered in her native tongue, tugging softly on the rope. "Just a few more steps to the pen." The Korath snorted through its dual nostrils, a sound like steam escaping from hot metal. It had been the same struggle. Every day since her parents died in the transport accident 6 months ago, her neighbors had urged her to sell the herd and move to the city. But this farm was all she had left of her family. Her younger brother had already abandoned the farm, taking their inheritance and disappearing into the bright lights of the capital. He claimed farming was beneath their family's status, that their parents' dream was foolish. But Nira couldn't let go. Every stone of the boundary walls, every blade of the silver grass held memories of happier times. A shadow in the distance says she struggled with the stubborn beast. A movement caught her eye. A figure approached from the eastern trail, walking with the steady gait of someone who had traveled far. In the fading light, she couldn't make out details, but something about the stranger's silhouette seemed different. Taller than her people, with broader shoulders and a peculiar way of moving. Fear crept up her spine.
Ow.
Travelers rarely came this way, and those who did usually brought trouble. Pirates, raiders, or worse. She glanced toward her small dwelling where her father's old plasma rifle hung above the door. Too far to reach if this stranger meant harm? The Korath sensed her tension and became more agitated. Pulling against the rope with renewed strength, Nira's feet slipped in the soft earth and she stumbled backward. The rope burned through her hands as the massive creature broke free, thundering toward the open grassland. "No," she cried out, watching months of careful breeding and nurturing lumber away into the darkness. An unexpected offer, the stranger had drawn closer now. In the light of the 3 moons, she could see him clearly. He was definitely not of her species. His skin was a warm brown color, his hair dark and cropped short. He wore simple traveling clothes, dusty from long roads, and carried only a small pack on his shoulders. Most remarkably, he showed no weapon, no sign of aggression. He was human. Nira had heard stories of humans, of course. They were said to be fierce warriors, brilliant engineers, and passionate in all things they pursued. But she had never expected to see one in person, certainly not at her remote farm. The human watched the escaped Korath disappear into the night, then turned to her with eyes that seemed both kind and tired. When he spoke, his voice was deep and gentle, speaking her language, with only a slight accent. "That one will return by morning," he said, nodding toward where the beast had vanished. "They never go far from their herd." Nira stared at him, uncertain whether to run or stand her ground. How do you know about Korath?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I've worked with many types of livestock across different worlds. Each species has its own nature, but they're more alike than different." He gestured toward her small dwelling. "You're managing this herd alone?" She nodded, suddenly embarrassed by her obvious struggles. "Since my parents passed? I know it looks hopeless, but I can handle it." The human studied her for a moment, taking in her rope-burned hands, her exhausted posture, the way she held herself despite her obvious fatigue. "I'm Marcus," he said simply. "I'm traveling through, looking for work and a place to rest for a few days. I could help with your herd in exchange for meals and a place to sleep." A moment of Decisioner's practical mind warred with her instincts. She needed help desperately, but trusting a stranger, especially an alien stranger, carried enormous risks. Yet something in his manner, the way he had immediately understood her situation without judgment, made her want to believe he was genuine. "I don't have much to offer," she said carefully. Simple food, a place in the barn to sleep. The work is hard, and the Korath can be dangerous. Marcus nodded. Not looking for luxury, just honest work. He paused, studying her face in the moonlight. And perhaps someone who won't judge me for my past mistakes. There was something in his tone, a weight of old pain that resonated with her own loneliness. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. Very well. 1 week and we'll see how it goes. As they walked toward the farmhouse together, Nira couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything. The 3 moons seemed to shine brighter, casting their joined shadows across the ancient soil of her family's land. Behind them in the darkness, the escaped Korath had already begun its journey home. Dawn of discovery, the first sun, had barely crested the eastern hills when Nira emerged from her dwelling, expecting to find the escaped Korath somewhere in the distant grasslands. Instead, she discovered the massive beast standing calmly in the main pen, contentedly chewing on fresh grain. Her breath caught in her throat. Marcus stood nearby, checking the pen's gate latches with practiced efficiency. His clothes were already dusty from morning work, and she could see he had been up for some time. The other Korath gathered around him with unusual calm, their typical morning agitation nowhere to be seen. How did you... She began, then stopped, staring at the impossible scene before her. He turned toward her, his dark eyes catching the early sunlight. Found her about an hour before dawn, just as I said she would be. She was waiting by the water trough, calling for the others. Nira had been managing these beasts for months, fighting them every single day just to get them from pen to pasture, and back again. Yet here they stood, peaceful as domestic pets, responding to this strange human as if he were their natural leader. I brought fresh water and checked their hooves. Marcus continued, approaching her with slow, deliberate movements. The big male there has a stone wedged in his front left pad. Should be removed today before it causes infection. She nodded, still too amazed to speak coherently. In all her years helping her parents, she had never seen the Korath so manageable. Even her father, who had raised them from birth, struggled with their stubborn nature, working as one as the morning progressed. Nira found herself working alongside Marcus, with an ease she had never experienced. He seemed to anticipate the animals' movements, positioning himself to guide them rather than force them. When she stumbled under the weight of a water bucket, his strong hand steadied her elbow, sending warmth shooting up her arm. Easy, he murmured, his voice close to her ear.
Right.
Their fingers brushed as he took the bucket from her hands, and she felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. She had been alone for so long, focused only on survival, that she had forgotten what it felt like. To have someone genuinely care about her well-being, Marcus worked with quiet efficiency, never showing off his strength, but using it purposefully.
Right.
When he knelt to examine the injured Korath's hoof, the massive creature stood perfectly still, as if sensing his intent to help rather than harm. There, he said, extracting a sharp stone from the beast's pad. That should feel much better. The Korath made a low rumbling sound that Nira recognized as contentment. Her own people had never mastered this level of connection with the beasts. Yet this human stranger had achieved it in a single morning. Shared moments by midday, they had. Accomplished more work than Nira typically managed in a full week. The Korath were settled in fresh pasture, their water troughs filled, their minor injuries tended. For the first time in months, she felt ahead of the endless tasks rather than drowning in them. They sat together in the shade of an ancient silverleaf tree, sharing the simple meal she had prepared. Marcus ate with genuine appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that made her cheeks flush with pleasure. "Tell me about your family," he said gently, his eyes focused on the grazing herd. "This is a beautiful farm. Speaks of generations of care." Nira felt the familiar tightness in her chest when she thought of her parents, but somehow it was easier to talk about them with Marcus. She found herself telling him about her father's dreams of expanding the herd, her mother's skill with the complex breeding records, her brother's decision to abandon everything their parents had built. "And you stayed," Marcus observed. "That took courage." "Or stubbornness," she replied with a bitter laugh. "Everyone says I should sell and move on." Marcus turned to look at her directly, his gaze intense and sincere. Some things are worth fighting for, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. There was something in his tone that suggested he spoke from personal experience. Before she could ask what he meant, he had risen and was moving toward the Korath again. The moment of vulnerability closed. Evening intimacies, the day ended, and the 3 moons rose overhead. They worked together to bring the herd back to the protective pens. Marcus moved with fluid grace, anticipating each animal's behavior, while Nira found herself watching him more than focusing on her own tasks. When their work was finally done, they stood together by the fence, both breathing hard from their efforts. The night air was cool and sweet, with the scent of silver leaf blossoms. "I haven't felt this accomplished in months," Nira admitted, her voice soft in the darkness. Marcus leaned against the fence beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You've been doing an incredible job alone. Anyone could see that." She turned to face him, surprised by the admiration in his voice. "You really think so?" Instead of answering with words, he reached out and gently touched one of her rope-burned palms, his thumb tracing the healing wounds. His touch was tender, careful, and it sent electricity through her entire body. "These hands tell the story of someone who never gives up," he said quietly. For a moment they stood frozen in that position, his warm hand cradling hers. Their eyes locked in the moonlight. Nira felt something awakening in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the day's work and everything to do with the man standing beside her. Then Marcus seemed to remember himself and stepped back, releasing her hand. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." She watched him walk toward the barn where he would sleep. Nira touched her palm where his hand had been, feeling the ghost of his warmth lingering on her skin. Revealing hearts, the days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Marcus proved himself invaluable, not just with the Korath, but with every aspect of farm maintenance. He repaired the aging fence posts with skill that spoke of military engineering training, and when Nira asked about it, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Learned it in service," he said simply, driving another post into the hard ground with more force than necessary. She began to notice other things about him. The way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, as if watching for threats. How he slept with one ear open, rising at the slightest unusual sound. The careful way he avoided discussing his past, deflecting her questions with gentle humor or by changing the subject entirely. One evening, as they sat by the small fire outside her dwelling, sharing the day's final meal, she decided to take a risk. "You're running from something," she said softly, not accusingly, but with understanding. Marcus's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. For a long moment he stared into the dancing flames. "What makes you say that? The way you move? Like someone who's always ready to fight or flee." She studied his profile in the firelight. The fact that you carry no identification, no personal belongings except what fits in that small pack. He set down his bowl and leaned back, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "Would it matter if I were?" "That depends on what you're running from." Confessions in Firelight Marcus was quiet for so long that Nira thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "I was a soldier, special operations. We were sent to pacify a mining colony that was refusing to meet production quotas." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. "What we found when we got there was families, children, people who were simply trying to survive under impossible conditions." Nira's breath caught as she saw tears reflecting the firelight in his eyes. "My commanding officer ordered us to use force anyway, said examples had to be made." Marcus's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I followed orders. We all did. And innocent people died because I was too much of a coward to say no." The weight of his confession hung heavy between them. Nira felt her heart breaking for the pain she could see etched in every line of his face. "That's why you left," she said gently. He nodded. "Went AWOL 3 months ago. They're probably still looking for me. Anyone who helps me could be considered a criminal." Instead of pulling away as he clearly expected, Nira reached across the small space between them and placed her hand over his clenched fist. His skin was warm and rough, with calluses from honest work. The man who helped save that injured Koroth, who works 16-hour days without complaint, who handles my animals with such gentle care, she said firmly. That's not the same person who made those mistakes. Marcus looked up at her, surprise and hope warring in his expression. You're not afraid of you? Never? She moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Everyone carries regrets. The measure of a person is what they do with them. Storm in shelters is summoned by the intensity of their conversation the night. Sky suddenly erupted with lightning. Thunder crashed overhead, and within moments heavy rain began falling in sheets. Marcus leaped up, immediately focused on the Koroth. The herd, he shouted over the wind. They'll panic in this storm. Together they ran toward the pens, already soaked to the skin. The Koroth were indeed agitated, their massive bodies pressing against the fence posts in their fear. Several of the barriers groaned under the pressure, threatening to give way. Marcus vaulted over the fence without hesitation, moving among the frightened beasts with calm authority. His voice rose in steady, soothing tones, somehow audible even. Over the storm's fury, gradually, the Koroth began to calm, responding to his presence like a bomb against their terror. But the storm was far from over. Lightning struck close enough to illuminate the entire farm in stark white detail, and the old barn shook under the assault of wind and rain. One of the support beams creaked ominously. The barn's not going to hold, Nira cried, grabbing Marcus's arm as he climbed back over the fence. Without discussion, they both ran for her dwelling, the only structure solid enough to weather the storm. They burst through the door, gasping and dripping. Just as another bolt of lightning split the sky, intimacy born of trust inside the small, warm space of her home, they stood catching their breath, suddenly aware of their soaked clothing and clothes. Proximity. Nira's thin work shirt clung to her body, and she noticed Marcus's respectful effort to keep his eyes on her face, rather than letting them wander. You should get out of those wet clothes, she said, her voice slightly breathless.
I'll
find you something dry. She rummaged through her belongings, finally producing one of her father's old shirts. When she turned back, Marcus had removed his wet shirt. She caught her breath at the sight of his muscled torso crossed with several old scars. Evidence of his violent past, but also proof of his survival, his strength. Their eyes met, and held, the air between them seemed charged with more electricity than the storm outside. Slowly, as if drawn by invisible threads, they moved closer to each other. Nira, Marcus said softly, her name like a prayer on his lips. I can't ask you to take this risk. My presence here could destroy everything you've worked for. Instead of answering with words, she reached up and gently traced one of the scars. Across his chest, he shivered under her touch, his breath catching. Some things are worth the risk, she whispered, echoing his earlier words back to him. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate tenderness of a man who had forgotten he could be gentle, could be loved. She melted against him, feeling alive in a way she hadn't since before her parents died. His hands tangled in her damp hair, and she could taste the promise of something beautiful and dangerous on his lips. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, her small dwelling, wrapped in each other's arms, they had found shelter from more than just the rain. Night hunters, the storm had passed by morning, leaving the air fresh and clean. But the peaceful aftermath was short-lived. Nira woke to find Marcus already dressed and standing by her window, his body tense with alertness. Something in his posture immediately put her on edge. What is it? She asked, pulling on her clothes quickly. Tracks around the Koroth pen, he said grimly. Something was testing the fences during the storm. They went outside together, and Nira gasped when she saw the evidence. Large clawed prints circled the pens, and several fence posts bored deep, gouges from whatever had made them. The Koroth huddled together in the center of their enclosure, their eyes wide with residual fear. Thraken hunters, she breathed, recognizing the distinctive claw marks. But they never come this close to inhabited areas. Marcus knelt beside one of the clearest prints, his expression dark. These aren't random. They're organized, scouting. This was a coordinated reconnaissance. Something in his tone made her stomach clench with dread. How would you know that? He stood slowly, his military training evident in the way he automatically scanned the surrounding area for threats. It's because I've seen it before. Predators don't usually work in groups this organized unless they're being directed. Directed by what? Marcus's jaw tightened. By whom you mean? Someone's hunting me, Nira. They've found this place. The truth emerges as the day progressed. Marcus became increasingly agitated.
Ow.
Checking and rechecking the farm's defenses, his soldier instincts taking over completely. That evening, he made a confession that chilled her to the bone. The mission I told you about, he said, pacing restlessly around her dwelling. It wasn't just a mining colony, it was a research facility. They were developing biological weapons, using enslaved populations as test subjects. Nira sat heavily in her chair, trying to process this revelation. And you were sent to ... to eliminate witnesses, to clean up the evidence. His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could see the pain etched in every line of his face. When I refused and helped some of the captives escape instead, I didn't just go AWOL. I became a target. What kind of target? Marcus stopped pacing and looked directly at her. The kind that military intelligence sends bioengineered hunters to eliminate. The kind where they don't care about collateral damage. As if summoned by his words, a low howl echoed across the grasslands, followed by answering calls from multiple directions. The Korath began lowing in distress, their massive bodies pressing against each other for comfort. They're here, Marcus said grimly. Moving to the weapon rack where her father's old plasma rifle hung. Battle in the darkness. The attack came just after midnight. Nira was awakened by the sound of the Korath screaming in terror, a sound she had never heard from them before. She rushed to the window and saw shapes moving in the darkness around the pens, shapes that moved wrong, too fluid and fast to be natural. Marcus was already outside. Her father's rifle in his hands, moving with deadly precision through the chaos. She watched in horrified fascination as he engaged the creatures, his military training evident in every calculated movement. But there were too many of them. For every Thraken hunter he drove off, two more seemed to appear from the darkness. She could see him being slowly overwhelmed, forced back toward the dwelling, against every instinct for self-preservation. Nira grabbed the emergency flare gun from her emergency supplies and ran outside. If Marcus was going to make his stand, here, she wouldn't let him face it alone. The first creature she saw up close made her blood freeze. It was definitely Thraken in origin, but wrong somehow. It's enhanced with cybernetic implants and bioengineered modifications that made it larger, faster, and more intelligent than any natural predator should be. Standing together, get back inside, Marcus shouted, firing a precise shot that sent one of the hunters tumbling into the darkness. Not a chance. She replied, firing the flare gun into the center of the pack. The bright light scattered them temporarily, giving Marcus's time to reload. Fought back to back, she with her knowledge of the terrain and emergency supplies. He, with his combat skills and tactical experience. Despite the terror of the situation, Nira felt a fierce joy at fighting alongside him, protecting something they both loved. There's too many, Marcus called out as his ammunition began to run low. We need to fall back to a more defensible position. But even as he spoke, the attacks began to slow. The hunters were regrouping, studying their tactics, learning from each engagement. These weren't mindless beasts. They were intelligent weapons designed specifically to adapt and overcome. Marcus Nira said quietly, understanding flooding through. They're not trying to kill us quickly. They're testing our responses, learning our capabilities. His face went pale as he realized she was right. They're gathering intelligence. This isn't the real attack. It's preparation for one. As if to confirm his words, the Thraken hunters began withdrawing into the darkness, their mission apparently complete. The Korath gradually calmed, though they remained clustered together in the center of their pen. The Choice's dawn broke over the damaged farm. Marcus and Nira surveyed the destruction. Several fence posts were destroyed, equipment was scattered and broken, and the terror in the Korath's eyes showed they understood they had been prey. I have to leave, Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with resignation and pain. My presence here has put you in danger. Next time they won't just be gathering intelligence. Nira felt her heart breaking, but she also felt a fierce determination she hadn't known she possessed. What if I don't want you to leave, Nira? You don't understand. These aren't just military hunters. They'll keep coming until they complete their mission. Anyone who stands with me becomes a target. She moved closer to him, taking his scarred hands in hers. Then we make sure they don't succeed. Marcus looked at her as if she had suggested flying to the moons with her bare hands. We, Nira, these are professional killers with unlimited resources. This is my home, she replied firmly. My family built this place with their own hands. I won't be driven away by anyone, no matter how dangerous they are. For the first time since the attack, Marcus smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. You realize you're talking about taking on military intelligence operatives with bioengineered weapons? I've seen what we can accomplish when we work together, she said, moving into his arms. Besides, you're not the same man who followed those orders. And I'm not the same woman who was struggling alone with her Korath. As she spoke, she realized the truth of her words. The frightened, isolated farmer Marcus had found was gone, replaced by someone who had found something worth fighting for. Something worth the risk. Together, then, Marcus said, his arms tightening around her. Together, she agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of courage and determination. Preparing for war the next few days transformed the peaceful farm into something resembling a fortress. Marcus used his military engineering knowledge to reinforce the dwelling and create strategic defensive positions, while Nira contributed her intimate understanding of the land and its hidden advantages. The Korath aren't just livestock, she explained as they worked on camouflaged fighting positions. They're incredibly intelligent and loyal once they trust you. If we can position them strategically, they become our allies in this fight. Looked skeptical until she demonstrated, with a series of subtle hand signals and vocal commands, she directed the massive beasts to form protective barriers around key areas of the farm. Their thick hides could stop most energy weapons, and their territorial instincts made them fierce protectors of their territory. Incredible, Marcus murmured, watching the Korath respond to her directions. I've never seen human-animal cooperation like this. We're not so different, Nira replied, checking the ammunition they had managed to acquire from her neighbors without revealing the full extent of their danger. When we trust each other completely, we can accomplish impossible things. As they worked side by side, their relationship deepened beyond the physical attraction and shared danger. They moved together with an intuitive understanding, each anticipating the other's needs and actions. When Marcus needed tools, Nira had them ready. When she struggled with heavy equipment, strong hands were there to help without being asked. The calm before, on their final night before the expected assault. They sat together on the roof of her dwelling, watching the 3 moons rise over their fortified farm. The Korath grazed peacefully below, but Nira could see the tension in their posture, the way they kept their heads raised and alert. Do you regret it? Marcus asked quietly, choosing to stay and fight instead of running. Nira considered the question seriously. She thought of her parents' dreams for this place, of the life of safety and routine she could have had in the city, of the loneliness she had endured before Marcus arrived. Never, she said firmly. This is where I belong. And more importantly, this is where we belong. Marcus turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. I love you, he said simply. I don't know how it happened so quickly, but I can't imagine existing without you now. Instead of words, she answered by pulling him down for a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't express verbally. Her love, her trust, her absolute commitment to facing whatever came next at his side. They made love under the alien stars, their bodies and souls joining with an intensity born of the knowledge that this might be their last peaceful night together. Every touch was both a promise and a goodbye. Every whispered endearment a prayer to whatever forces might protect them in the battle to come. The final stand, the attack, came just before dawn, when the natural light was weakest and shadows still provided cover. But this time, Marcus and Nera were ready. The Thraken hunters approached with coordinated precision, but they found a very different battlefield than they expected. Instead of a simple farm dwelling, they encountered a network of defensive positions, carefully placed obstacles, and most surprisingly, the Korath positioned as living shields and weapons. Now, Nera called out, and the massive beasts charged forward with thunderous roars, their 6 legs churning up clouds of dust as they scattered the initial assault formation. Marcus moved through the chaos like a deadly dancer, his every shot carefully calculated to protect both Nera and the Korath. His military training, once a source of shame, now became their salvation as he systematically eliminated threats with precise, efficient violence. But the hunters adapted quickly, regrouping and focusing their attack on the perceived weak point, Nera herself. They had identified her as Marcus's emotional vulnerability and concentrated their assault accordingly. "They're targeting you," Marcus shouted, abandoning his position to interpose himself between Nera and a pair of hunters that had broken through their defenses. Love conquers all. What the hunters hadn't anticipated was that Nera was no longer the helpless farmer they had expected to find. Weeks of working alongside Marcus, of fighting for her home and their love, had forged her into someone capable of holding her own in battle. She moved with fluid grace between the Korath, using their massive bodies as mobile cover while directing their protective instincts with skilled precision. When one hunter got too close, the largest male Korath, the same one Marcus had helped heal on his first day, charged forward with devastating force. The battle raged for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes. When the dust finally settled, the surviving hunters were retreating into the grasslands, their mission a failure. Marcus and Nera stood together in the center of their defended farm, battered and exhausted but victorious. "It's over," Marcus said, hardly believing their survival. But Nera shook her head. "No, it's just beginning. They'll send others, and we'll face them together. This is our home now, our life." Marcus looked around at the farm they had defended, at the Korath who had fought alongside them, at the woman who had chosen love over safety and home over exile. "Our life," he repeated, the words carrying the weight of promise and commitment. As the suns rose over their battle-scarred but still standing farm, Marcus and Nera began the work of rebuilding, of healing, of creating something beautiful from the ashes of conflict. The human had indeed come only to help with livestock, but he was leaving with something far more precious. He was leaving with a home, a purpose, and a love that had proven stronger than the forces arrayed against it. The Korath grazed peacefully. In the morning light, their trust in their human guardians absolute and unshakable. Like their caretakers, they had learned that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not for territory or resources, but for the right to love and be loved. In return, and in the end, that was a battle worth winning.